Well, hello, everybody. My name is State Representative Chris Taylor, and I represent the 76th Assembly District, which we're in. I did want to start this morning by just recognizing the tragedy at Molson Coors and extending just a heartfelt sorrow to our Milwaukee community and all of the family and friends impacted. In the wake of these tragedies, the answer is not to do nothing, it is to do everything. Right. And we need to take up the governor's special session bills because this kind of tragedy is not inevitable. We can do a lot to reduce these incidences, and we must do so. So our heart and our thoughts are with our Milwaukee community this morning. We are here today to stand up, raise our voices against the very ill-advised proposal to place F-35 military jets in the middle of our dense residential community here in Madison. I represent some of the neighborhoods most impacted, including the Carpenter Ridgeway neighborhood, which is an affordable, diverse neighborhood that we should be nurturing and encouraging and protecting, not entertaining proposals to substantially disrupt and potentially destroy. 90% of the constituents who have contacted my office expressing an opinion about these F-35 jets have been in opposition. Make no mistake about this. The people impacted, the communities impacted, very clearly oppose this very misguided proposal. This is not about whether we support people who serve in our military. My father was a veteran, my grandfather was a veteran. This is about where are we an appropriate venue for these planes? And I think this final EIS again confirms to us some of our worst nightmares, and it does confirm that we are not the place for these jets. And this final EIS does solidify some of the most negative consequences for our community, which, by the way, are some of the most negative, harmful consequences of any of the 5 sites being considered. The most negative, harmful consequences for Madison out of any of the 5 sites being considered, including over 2,200 individuals are now going to be in a zone deemed potentially incompatible for residential use. What that really means is you're not going to want to live in these zones. Who wants to live in a place where you can't open your window or your door, or your kids can't play outside? Is that the community? Is that the neighborhood people want to live in? If people are able to obtain federal help in doing some mitigation, what we know is, first of all, it's a big if. A lot of people aren't going to be eligible, and it's going to take years, if not decades. We also know that the initial military jet operations are going to increase 47% for an unspecified amount of time. That is, again, confirmed in this final EIS. And we know the serious increase in noise that our communities are going to experience are going to have a significant disproportionate impact to low-income and minority populations as well as children, resulting in environmental injustice to these communities. And again, this is one of the most severe consequences of any site being considered, and it will worsen the severe racial inequities that already plague our city and our county. Why on earth would we want to do this? Despite repeated requests, I alone have made 3 to the Air Force. They again fail to provide basic information to our community. Here is a chart. This was provided to Burlington, Vermont, which is the latest site to get these planes. And they're somewhat similar to us. They're an Air National Guard base. Their airport is in a more residential community. But I want to point out this is a measure of the noise difference between an F-16, which we currently have, and an F-35. And this is sound exposure level. It's one of the most accurate predictions of noise because it measures not just the intense noise, but the duration of the noise. 17 decibel difference. What this means is, what this chart shows is that these F-35 planes are 17 decibels louder. What that translates into the human ear is 4 times louder. Do not believe the lie by the proponents that these jets are not louder. I have heard them with my own ears. I have been to Luke Air Force Base. They are the loudest things I've ever heard in my life. Don't believe the lie, okay? We were not provided this. Why? What is the Air Force hiding? Why wouldn't they provide this kind of comparison? I asked for it many times. Many of you standing behind me, and let me tell you, this is a big coalition behind me. These are members of our community that have come together. We asked for this information. They refused to provide it. What is the Air Force hiding? That is my question. What are they hiding? The other really harmful impact that has been, I think, not fully explored is the impact in regards to PFAS contamination. These are these forever chemicals. We know there's contamination on the Truax base. It's spread to our lakes. It's spread to our waterways. A city well has been shut down. The State Department of Natural Resources has urged the public to not eat fish out of Lake Mendota or Starkweather Creek. These are forever chemicals. They are very difficult to get rid of. Well, the final EIS lists only 3 sites that have potentially released these horrible pollutants into the environment, our lakes and our creek. But the Air National Guard has yet to complete a full site investigation and they don't know the extent of this contamination. So the full impact of digging up acres of contaminated soil, which is what the Air National Guard is proposing, is also unknown. It also could have severe consequences for our community in terms of pollution that's getting into our lakes and our waterways. For the sake of access to clean water alone, this proposal should be stopped. It's absolutely ridiculous. The cost and harm is just too great to our community. We will not risk our clean water. So who is pushing this proposal? It's certainly not the communities being impacted. As I've said, those who have contacted me vehemently oppose. Who's pushing this is a network of Madison corporate power structure that seems more concerned about getting maybe military contracts and increasing corporate profits than protecting the health and vibrancy of our communities. That who really is behind this proposal. So I am really urging everybody to call your elected officials, raise your voices, tell them you do not support this, that this is a bad idea for our community. And I would say this as well, that every elected official has a voice in advocating for our community. If you do not have a voice, do not run for public office. You have a voice, use your voice. So next, we are very privileged to have with us Tehmina Islam, who is a resident of lives in the heart of Eakin Park, which is a community I'm very worried about is going to be really impacted, and she's also a business owner and can talk to you about those impacts. Thank you.
Thank you to the press for being here and to the people who are standing behind me. My name is Tehmina Islam. I am a licensed midwife providing home birth care. I've been a midwife for 9 years and I've attended over 300 deliveries. Many of my clients have come to my home-based practice where they seek prenatal care. I am a homeowner in the Eakin Park neighborhood and I've lived there for 5 years. My home is in the 65 decibel zone, which renders a home incompatible with residential use. Though some of these homes may be eligible for sound mitigation, my home has an avigation easement on it, which is a contract that was signed from homeowners in the 1990s with the Dane County Regional Airport that allows the airport to have a lifelong access to the space above my home, 60 feet above the ground, for the life of the home. And so that restricts me from accessing sound mitigation money. I'm not worried about the sound mitigation money. As I said, I work as a home birth midwife in this county, and I'm really worried about the health impact of the F-35s on our communities. I have served hundreds of people in my home office, many who are people of color. 3/4 of my practice are on Medicaid. The American Academy of Pediatrics and the Physicians for Social Responsibility Wisconsin chapter has already come out with statements that have said that noise impacts on pregnant people can cause preterm labor and growth restriction in babies. Exposure to this noise can cause hearing loss in children and reduce memory retention in children in our communities. Studies have shown that PFAS, toxic chemicals from firefighting foam, can be found in breast milk and in our bodies, and these chemicals can cause cancer, thyroid disease, and weaken childhood immunity. One of our very own wells in Madison, well number 15, has already been shut down due to high levels of PFAS in our water. Groundwater samples taken from the planned construction sites at Truax have already exceeded the EPA health advisory limit of 70 parts per trillion. The Environmental Working Group, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, has issued that 1 part per trillion is a safe level. If we allow construction at Truax, we will further contaminate our drinking water. This issue isn't about noise and the inconvenience of it. It's about protecting the most vulnerable people in our community: babies, children, pregnant people, veterans with PTSD, low-income families, and people of color. The EIS statement that came out from the Air Force has already stated that there's a disproportionate impact in this community on low-income people and people of color if the F-35s were to bed down here. This issue isn't about supporting our troops. My parents are immigrants to this country, and I don't ever take my rights for granted, and I will never forsake this country. But what good does it do to protect our freedoms if we cannot drink the water in our communities? What good does it do when our children cannot hear or learn? This issue isn't about the neighbors on the northeast side or who are on the flight path. Do you drink water? Then it's your issue too. We're all on stolen Ho-Chunk land, and it's time we started acting like stewards of the land and protecting our drinking water and our children and each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here, and thanks for raising your voices. My name is Syed Abbas. Truax is in my district. The district I represent is overwhelmingly in opposition of F-35. The emails I got, the phone calls I got, and the people I met in Econ Park Neighborhood Associate, in Econ Park, in Emerson East, in Carpenter Ridge, which is hit really hard by F-35. As Rep. Chris Taylor mentioned, it's under 75 dB. These people, more than 95% people who reach out to me, they were in opposition of F-35 bed down on north side. It absolutely have devastating, I will say, impact on those community those Americans who worked really hard. They pay their taxes, they work first time shift, second time, third time. These are hard working people. They love this country. They do everything for this country. And when they ask a peaceful life, they ask to sleep in their own bed with peace. They ask to protect their kids, their health, their well-being, their learning ability. What we are giving them back is a devastating, loud noise of fighter jet planes. We cannot justify what we are taking away from their life. We cannot justify by saying there's economic development. Is it really worth it, what we are saying about economic development on the life of these people? More than over 2,000 people will be impacted. Within that district, there is a manufactured mobile home. These people proudly live in their own small houses, and that is on a Packer Avenue. Within this report, this is also not addressed how this community, more than 300 units are not included in impact report, and there is no mitigation policy. Who will pay eventually for that? The loss of tax revenue, the loss of jobs. Who will pay for this? And loss of housing. Who will be responsible for that? As my colleagues here mentioned about PFAS and other health impact, this report clearly, that's their report, not report written by me and anybody else, clearly say about disproportionate impact on low income and minority community living within that district. I will also like to share another point. When I was at Truax, we had a meeting with, I was with other alders, we had a meeting with the Air Force National Guard. We asked that question about afterburner. And we asked about how do you use, why you use, and there are several reasons. The runway, the length of the runway, also the climate. We are within a building design, because that's my professional, energy efficiency. We are in a 6th climate zone. 7th is extremely cold. We are very cold at 6. And they said in a cold climate zone, you need to use afterburner when it gets really cold, or also when it gets really humid. This report, EIS, all the 5 locations they studied, they put 5% afterburner. That is it. This is wrong. How you can, southern state, you can compare their climate zone with north climate zone and you put 5%. This can be changed. What point I am trying to raise here is This is a conservative estimate. This is a best case scenario. That's what they are putting in this report. In the best case scenario, when you put 5%, if this 5% increase to 20%, then what? This number 65, 75 dB, they go far up, far up. This community of 2,000 people, they might end up 4,000. So I will urge Air Force, Army National Air Guard, and also local politician, county, state, and federal level to reconsider their position and oppose F-35 for sake of this community. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Jesse Pycha-Holst. I'm with Solidarity Realty. I want to thank the press for coming. I want to thank everybody on the Safe Skies Coalition and of course, Representative Taylor, who is working hard on this issue in a vacuum of leadership. The final EIS is a damning indictment of the F-35's place here in Madison. Buried in over 1,000 pages on page Wisconsin 79, the Air Force admits that any economic benefits would, quote, not be significant, unquote. The EIS methodology to describe lost property value is questionable and at times self-contradicting. But what we can discern is that our initial estimates of the property values affected have been very conservative. We have initially found that over $255 million of residential property will be deemed, quote, incompatible for residential use, unquote. The Air Force has found that the total value of all types of real estate affected in that 65 dB zone will surpass $1.7 billion. And in an attempt to minimize these drastic effects, the EIS uses this to talk only about lost tax revenue, but does nothing at all to address compensation to homeowners and business owners. Proponents' claim of benefits come from a UW extension study funded by Scott Walker's WEDC that indicates Truax receives $93 million in federal tax dollars, but places no guarantees that this money will stay in Dane County, and admittedly says nothing of negative economic impacts or opportunity costs of other missions or land uses. Contrary to what proponents and some policymakers say, the EIS states explicitly that without the F-35, the Wisconsin Air National Guard at Truax will retain its current aircraft and mission. So even that $93 million stays in Wisconsin without the F-35s, just as Boise will retain the use of their A-10 aircrafts, even though they have turned down the F-35s. New data provided in the EIS indicates that F-35 takeoffs will exceed decibel levels that can cause permanent hearing loss, and this data is without the use of those louder afterburners, and no data, including the use of afterburners, is included in the EIS. And in short, this deal being offered to Madison is that in exchange for a negligible economic impact to the positive, we should cause children, minorities, and our environment to suffer. We should blight entire swaths of our city to ensure Lockheed Martin makes a profit, and we should torpedo the growth in neighborhoods like Eakin Emerson and projects like Oscar Mayer for 64 permanent jobs, more than half of which won't even be in Wisconsin. The good people of Boise and their mayor were smart enough to turn down that horrendous offer. I only hope that Madison and our leaders in Dane County have enough wisdom to do the same.
Hello, and thank you all for being here. My name is Lance Green, and I worked at the DNR for 20 years, and I've lived for almost 40 years just a couple blocks away from Starkweather Creek. I've really enjoyed this urban gem right here in the middle of our city, and joined the board of the Friends of Starkweather Creek years ago. I do monitoring in the creek, so I actually immerse myself into that water that's full of PFAS each month during the summer. Friends of Starkweather Creek takes hundreds of people and lots of kids onto that creek every year, and we do cleanups. And the kids love to reach in and grab the garbage, and they love, and people walk along there all the time, and they bring their dogs, and their dogs swim in it, and all that kinds of wonderful things. Now we find that a couple 3 years ago that we've got these PFAS in there at very high levels, some of the highest levels in the state. And we're finding out that these forever chemicals were sprayed in a couple of places for the last 50 years, right next to the creek, right onto the ground, and so they're just continuously down in the ground at high levels, very, very high levels, seeping into the creek every single day. So we have a continuous source of these into our creek, into our lakes. You probably heard about the DNR testing of the fish in Lake Monona. We know that those fish are very highly contaminated, and once we see what the fish levels are maybe in the downstream lakes, there are probably going to be warnings about eating the fish there too. This is a major, major consequence in our community. There are people who fish on Lake Monona and eat those fish and feed them to their families almost every day probably, and you know that this is something that should not be happening at all. The environmental impact statement that the Air Force has put out just does not address this at all. Not just the continuing problem, but how much is there? How are we going to find that out? Can we do a complete evaluation of the site? How are we going to get those chemicals cleaned up? How are we going to slow down those chemicals from going in the water? And what's worse, there's going to be a whole bunch of construction. Well, the airport was built on an old giant wetland. It's all nice flat. It used to be a wetland, and Starkweather Creek was routed around it. Well, if you dig a few feet into that wetland to do some construction, you're going to have tons of water flowing in, and you're going to have to keep pumping that water. That dewatering process, where does that water going to go? It's going to be full of PFAS and other horrible chemicals, and we need to be assured that that's going to be cleaned up before it's released. We're not getting very good assurances, and we certainly don't trust what the military has done for all these years, because this problem's been going on, as I said, for 50 years. So we from Friends of Starkweather Creek are concerned. What are we even going to do as of this year with taking all the kids and pets and everybody out on the creek? We're concerned that this problem is just going to continue, not be addressed. We're concerned that it's going to cost millions of dollars possibly to slow down or stop this contamination. Who's going to do all that? So I think our community should be very concerned about this, and we should push all of our elected officials on every level, the city, the county, the state, the federal government, to address these problems as soon as possible and do it right. Thank you.
I guess I'm up. My name is Rebecca Kemble. I represent the 18th District on the Madison Common Council, which is just west of the airport. My house is 2 miles west of the airport, and this morning at home, and actually many days last week as well, I heard the F-16s taking off in Afterburner, and I could actually see them. And I'm 2 miles west of the airport. And the noise, regardless of my preference of whether I like to hear the noise or not, it affected me physiologically. It affected me neurologically. And I am way, way outside of those noise-modeled maps, decibel zones. And I'm just thinking, what about those kids at Lakeview School? What about those autistic kids at the Richardson School? That's right there. And these are F-16s flying in Afterburner. You can hear the difference when they fly normal and when they fly in Afterburner. So I say that to make a couple points about the EIS, both the draft and the final EIS, and to underscore what Representative Taylor said. We're not getting all the information that we have requested, that we need, and the Air Force, it's not just we, but the Air Force is not getting all of the information that they need to make the decision. So we need to be clear that it's the Air Force making the decision. It's not the Air National Guard making the decision. We're not getting all the information because the actual impacts, the neurological, physical, physiological impacts of the noise are far greater than what is described in the EIS. And the noise modeling maps are, even as sort of conservatively crafted as they are to display the least amount of impact, that's still a huge amount of impact. And for those who say they like the sound of the jets because it's the sound of freedom, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. It hurts humans. And that's what the EIS tells us in documents referenced, documents included by reference, that level of noise hurts humans, especially small humans, small babies, and animals, and all living things, actually. So another big chunk of missing information in this EIS that many of us requested had to do with the nature of the composite materials with which these F-35 jets are made. These are not aluminum planes. These are military-grade composite materials that when they crash and burn are extremely toxic. And even though the Air Force has said they has a program for stopping the use of PFAS firefighting foam, they have to use it on these F-35s because of the nature of the materials that the planes are composed of. So, as Tehmina said, if you drink water, this affects you. If you live within, the takeoff and landing zone a couple of miles of this affects you because a potential crash could mean disaster for the surrounding neighbors, and a fire that, when these things crash and light on fire, it's not easy to put that fire out. Our firefighters expose themselves to serious danger if they respond. The military has to respond to these, and they have to respond with these toxic firefighting foams. And that could affect anyone around the takeoff and landing zone. So, I ran for office in 2015 because I was seeing the way things were going in the state and national politics level. We had to figure out new ways to protect and defend our water, our land, and our people in light of policies at the federal and state level that were removing these protections. And it's up to us who live here, who live on the ground, who live with our neighbors, who, like Lance, literally take care of the water, to stand up for that, to stand up for our neighbors, and say, no, you can't create a dead zone in our city when we're spending so much effort and resources at the county and city level to fight racial disparities, to deal with affordable housing crisis, to clean up our water. It is not acceptable for the Air Force to make a decision to create this dead zone and make all of those things worse. So please, if you're watching this, contact your U.S. Senators Ron Johnson and Tammy Baldwin. Regardless of what they say, they do have influence on this decision. Senator Baldwin is on a multiplicity of military committees and subcommittees. She is in communication with the Air Force all of the time. Ask her to not sacrifice her constituents for short-term political gains.
So what are you hearing from her? From her and Congressman Buchanan?
So from both of them, when the first EIS came out, they said they had questions, our mayor as well. We have questions that aren't answered by this. Please, can you answer this question? And they ranged from, kinds of impacts to, the PFAS question. Guess what? None of those questions were answered. None of those questions were answered. And the mayor has said, if you can't answer these questions, and if you can't say that these impacts will not happen, we can't support this decision.
What are you hearing back from Senator Baldwin and Congressman Buchanan? Are they moving more towards your guys'
Have you heard
direction?
Yeah. I mean, I am, I talk to everybody about this. They're probably sick of me, actually, at this point. But yeah, I've talked to everybody. I mean, we have asked, and Representative Pocan's office has attempted to help us as we try to get some information, as has Senator Baldwin's office. I mean, I'm in contact, talking to them about my concerns. When I got back from Luke Air Force Base and heard these planes for myself and met with somebody who lives 10 miles away from that Air Force Base and still can't sleep at night and is so disrupted by the noise, I absolutely have shared all of this information.
You feel like they're moving your direction, I guess is what I'm getting at.
I think that, are they moving in my direction? I hope so, honestly. I hope so. And we will continue to talk with them about that direction and moving there. I mean, honestly, we all need to be speaking up about this. There is no excuse. There is no excuse.
Maybe you could ask them.
Yeah.
Maybe you could go ask them. Yeah.
I mean, the first.
Did you get done with your comment?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we can take questions. Any other questions, Jim? Does anybody?
When you look back at I haven't done my historical homework on this, but in the 90s when the proposal was to bring F-16s, was there this kind of opposition then as well?
Does anybody? No? Gosh,
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, not that we're aware of. Was there? In the driftless area, okay.
Oh, no, that was a different issue. That was a different issue
Yeah, that was a bit
of
different.
them doing low-level flights over
Yeah.
the driftless area. That wasn't about bringing F-16s here.
Yeah, yeah. So I just don't know. We can look at that and see. That was a long time ago.
I'm not asking, suggesting that it's the same, obviously, but
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, for example, if this was put on over by Maury, would this have already been quashed because people have more income and since
It's
you
an
refer to this as a
interesting-
low-income area?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's going to impact a lot of people. I think it's going to impact everybody who lives on the isthmus and on the north side. So I don't think it's just going to impact low-income people, but the disparate impact is significant. We know the people most impacted are the people who can least afford to be impacted and least afford to move. So that is significant, and if you look at the 5 sites being considered, it's one of the most severe negative consequences. This disparate impact, this environmental injustice is the most severe for our site. So you have to question, why on earth would anybody think that we're a good site? When you look at the water contamination that is yet to be resolved, but we know we've hit the tip of the iceberg with the contamination, it's probably much worse. We know, looking at their own data, that these planes are louder. And this is a point to make too. Military planes, they've not gotten quieter. They've gotten louder, unlike commercial aircraft. They've gotten quieter over the decades. Why they've gotten louder is because there's more stuff on them. And you can bet over the next decade, these F-35s are going to get heavier, they're going to be harder to get in the ground, and they're going to get louder. That is what military experts I've talked to have said. So these are just going to get louder, these jets, most likely. And here is some of the data that shows how much louder they are. So on every single measure that you look at, we have the consequences of profound negative impacts. We are not an appropriate site. We are not an appropriate site. And that is what we're trying to get people to look at. We're trying to get people to look at the data, look at what the report says, talk to the experts, look at the community response. That's what we should be looking at. When we met with Assistant Secretary Henderson back last year, he promised us that the voices of our community would matter. So we are calling on him to listen to the voices and hear the voices for our community. We don't want to destroy our neighborhoods. We don't want to degrade our quality of life. We want to improve people's quality of lives. That's what we should be focused on, not this. Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, so the State National Guard has provided the mayor's office some information that contradicts the EIS, the final EIS, in terms of the number of operations.
Look, they
Does
provided.
that concern you or alleviate your concerns?
No, it does not concern me. We have not, I don't think we're getting correct information from the Air National Guard, and they're not the ones to make the decision. Let's be real clear. They provided probably that same information to the Air Force, and the Air Force rejected it. The Air Force affirmed that the number of operations is going to go up 47%, at least initially. We don't know how long that is. That's part of what contributes to this increased noise. We're going to have more operations. We're going to have more planes flying at once. We don't have any information about the sound of simultaneous takeoffs of 8 planes at once. When I was in Arizona, I heard 5 planes at once. You cannot comprehend the noise. You do not understand it until you hear it. And then you understand the big problems. So we don't have that information. But no, the Air National Guard has been saying these things, but honestly, at the end of the day, the Air Force makes the decision. So I know the Air National Guard provided the Air Force with this, the data, because they've been talking about it, and guess what? The Air Force rejected it. Anything else?
I'm wondering about the number that's been put out, the 100 million in economic activity cited by proponents of it. I wanted to clarify the gentleman from Solidarity Realty.
Do you want to talk about that?
Study funded by Scott Walker.
Do you want to talk about it? Yeah. Page study.
I can provide
We
it
can get
after
that to
this.
you.
I can pull it up for you, absolutely. And it's $93 million. Yep, and that's federal tax dollars coming to the state is what the report outlines. It's not coming to the local community. That is everything from the base buying light bulbs, which they're not buying at the local Ace Hardware, food for the mess hall, replacement jet parts that we don't make in Wisconsin.
And then, Chris,
Yeah.
do the city or the county have a plan? I know you've been meeting a lot with each other to study the effects of the loss of property value and the cost of what mitigation that would be provided to homeowners with easements and who live in mobile housing.
Do you want to talk about that?
Well, the city staff did a report on the draft EIS that evaluated some of that, but again, we don't have all of our questions, basic questions answered. That would be the basis on which to do that. Additionally, our city staff have questioned those noise modeling maps that conveniently go right down Wright Street, excluding our public housing at Truax. And if you ask anyone who works on EISs or noise modeling, they will tell you that any straight line on a noise model is not accurate. So that straight line goes straight down that street. So our city is very concerned about that. I don't know if what is happening right now. You would have to ask the mayor if she has our staff looking deeper into this after the final EIS has come out.
And I just want to add, here in the state legislature, the Republicans have cut shared revenue for localities, and they've restricted the abilities of cities to raise their levy limits. There is not a lot of wiggle room here in new income for the city of Madison, or the county for that matter. Are you seriously going to entertain a proposal that we know is going to introduce by the millions at the most conservative with a real suspect methodology that was used in this EIS? Are you really going to tout a proposal that could reduce your tax revenue by millions and millions of dollars when there's such a limited opportunity to make that up? So we're happy to stick around, I think, hopefully. Oh, yes.
Just one small thing about the line, about 65 dB. So my house, I live in Econ Park, just like Tehmina. So my house is 2 blocks away from 65 dB, just 2 blocks. And I have a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old. And my little daughter, she always put her hand on the ear, says, too loud, and we are inside the house. And that impact, that line about 65 dB, sometimes for me, I cannot understand. I was like, this is right there. The plane is right there. My house is under 65 dB. And that's where they land through Econ Park into the Pick and Save and the golf area. That's where the landing pad. We are not very far from the landing and takeoff pad. So these lines are totally, doesn't make any sense.
Could I just make a point?
Yeah, sure.
I just want to clarify a point about this 65 decibel zone. Just so we're clear about that, this is measured in DNL. That's the day-night level. That's an average between all the sound events during the day and the absolute dead of night. Right. So when we're having a conversation and it's 65 decibels or so, and you say to yourself, it doesn't seem that low to me. That's not what we're talking about here. That's a metric that's used by the federal government to talk about who needs to get displaced, who needs to get compensated and not.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming, and thanks to all of you for all of your work.
Thank you, Chris.